We would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Simpson Centre for Food and Agricultural Policy webinar, Can We Have Our Beef and Reduce Methane Too? I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge that this webinar is part of our larger public education series on our carbon program, which is generously sponsored by UFA and the RCF. Today's topic is focused on methane emissions in beef production. The Simpson Centre's carbon program investigates strategies to reduce emissions while remaining competitive internationally. Before I introduce today's panelists, a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you're having difficulties hearing the webinar at any time, or you're experiencing an unreliable internet signal, you can always use the call-in number included in your webinar's registration email, or by clicking the arrow next to the microphone icon and pressing switch to phone audio. There's a box labeled Q&A. This is where you can pose your questions to the panelists. If you see a question in the Q&A box that you think is important to ask, you can also click the thumbs up icon on the question to move it to the front of the queue. The structure of today's webinar will consist of one quick presentation giving you an overview, and then two larger presentations. Following that, we will be going into questions and answer with the opportunity for you to ask your own questions. Feel free to submit your questions at any time, but please note they won't be asked of the panelists until the end of the webinar. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful presenters today. Up first, we have Anne Wasco, the former chair of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Up next, we'll have Maik Kindermann, the Director of Innovation and Herd Research and Development at Bovaer. And then we'll have Tamara Loisel, founder and CEO of Cinergraze Inc. Up first, we have Anne, who will be sharing some opening remarks about the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Take it away, Anne.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks so much for having me here today. We're going to get the presentation. I've just got a couple of quick slides for you. And sorry. There we go. And just wanted to bring some comments from on behalf of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Today's webinar poses a question, and I believe the answer is clearly yes, we can have our beef and reduce methane too. The industry is feeling very good about climate change goals. We have set goals that align with our federal government and our stakeholders. The Canadian beef sector is in a unique position to offer solutions. We are looking forward to developing collaborations and partnerships to move forward together to achieve our common goals. Next slide, please. For the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, it starts with measurement and baselining. The CRSB commissions a large study to measure sustainability performance and inform goal setting. Most of the numbers on this screen that you see in front of you came from our study we did in 2016. Our second study is out for peer review right now, so we're looking forward to sharing those results later this year. What we learned in that measurement and baselining process is Canada has one of the lowest GHG footprints of beef production in the world, contributing just 2.4% of total Canadian GHG emissions. Also, lands used by the beef sector store 1.5 billion tons of carbon and sequester carbon emissions from over 3.5 million cars per year. Beef farmer and ranchers also steward 68% of habitat for biodiversity and provide many other environmental benefits that cannot be overlooked when considering how we mitigate and adapt to climate change. In a nutshell, agriculture is a system. Next slide, please. The Canadian beef industry has shared goals. In 2020, the 7 national beef organizations set goals, and here's a sample of some of them. Safeguard the existing 1.5 billion tons of carbon stored on lands managed with beef cattle. Sequester an additional 3.4 million tons of carbon every year. Reduce primary GHG emission intensity by 33% by 2030. And reduce food loss and waste from secondary processing to consumer by 50% by 2030. The intent is that these are stretch goals that encourage the industry to strive for something we would not achieve without setting them. Part of the reason for setting an ambitious goal is to encourage innovation and push industry as a whole to think differently and move outside of our comfort zone. These goals highlight the work of the Canadian beef industry as integral for climate change mitigation and the sustainability of our food system. Next slide. We're focusing on delivering our goals. Our scientists ran scenarios, and these are all of the different ways that we will get there in terms of our GHG goal. The areas with the largest potential are feed efficiency, barley yield, and soil organic carbon. We have developed an action plan and are looking forward to continuing to produce safe, high quality, sustainable, nutritious beef and continually improving how we do it. And with that, Sean, I'm looking really forward very much so to the next 2 presenters on some of the innovative ways that are going to help us move the needle. So with that, I'll sign off for now and looking forward to listening and being part of the questions.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Anne. I think that was really informative and a really great way for us to get started. We do have a poll question for you folks now. So we'll pop that up right now and we'll give you approximately a minute to answer that. The question is, which one of these do you think has the highest potential in producing low methane beef? Is the first one manure management, the second one use of feed additives, and the third one cutting down on beef consumption? So we'll give you a minute to answer those, folks, and then we will move on with the webinar and we will display the results. Perfect, and just please turn in those final votes as we'll be ending the poll here right away. So again, the question was, which one of these do you think has the highest potential in producing low methane beef? And if we could get the poll results popped up. So it looks like 43% of you said manure management. Next up was 36% of you said the use of feed additives, and 20% of you said cutting down on beef consumption. That's really interesting, and I think you'll find that our next couple presentations will also talk about this. So I now have the pleasure of handing it over to Maik Kindermann, the Director of Innovation and the Head of Research and Development at Bovaer.
Thanks a lot, Sean. I hope you can hear me. And let me pull up the slides, share screen. Voila. Share. I hope you see the screen. Let me know if you do.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So Bovaer, how cows can help us fight climate change. And Bovaer is a proven solution to reduce enteric methane from dairy and beef cattle. My name is Maik Kindermann. I'm heading the R&D program, Bovaer. I'm also the inventor of this technology, and I'm working for the company DSM. Let me spend one sentence on DSM. We are not a startup company. We are 23,000 people at the moment, and in a couple of months we will be over 30,000 people because there is a merger upcoming. I'm sitting in Switzerland. Bovaer was also developed here. DSM is a Dutch company, is moving now more to Switzerland, and the entire product development until today was over 10 years. One thing that's important, and it's also shared in the slides afterwards, we have published all our results with our academic partners along the way. And as of today, we have 62 peer-reviewed scientific publications out. So there is nothing secret, and you can ask me any question in this webinar or also read our research along the way. It's all transparent. Very important, we start always with this statement, the world needs cows, right? We are not here to argue against cow. We are a big fan of cows because they are converting feed into valuable nutrition for us that we cannot eat, the grass, and they provide beef and dairy products. And also very important, they support our livelihood. Millions of jobs are relating to this sector. So we are a big supporter of this industry. It's very important to think about methane. 150 countries committed to reduce methane emission, fight global warming through a global methane pledge. Why is methane so important? We are all used to think about carbon dioxide, CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Methane is getting much more now on the radar screen for two reasons. First, methane is trapping much more heat than CO2, and methane can be translated into CO2 equivalents. And on a 20 years time frame that's now more and more used, methane is 84 times more, trapping 84 times more heat than CO2. On the other hand, methane gets destroyed in the atmosphere by natural processes over 10 years. And if you combine these two things, first, it traps more heat, it's much more dangerous as a greenhouse gas, but it also disappearing sooner than CO2 from the atmosphere, means if we do something about methane, this is our best and fastest way that we have at the moment to fight global warming and climate change. So it's a huge unrecognized potential in addressing methane, and therefore I'm emphasizing this again and again, and with the global methane pledge that's also recognized globally. The carbon footprint of a kilogram of edible product, milk or meat, is shown here. And what's very intriguing is the largest single contributor to the carbon footprint of a kilogram of edible product and for meat and for milk is very similar. It's around more or less 50% that's coming out of the burping of methane from a cow. And addressing this contributor and saying we reduce this by 30, 40, 50%, or even 90% has a huge impact on sustainable food production systems. That's where we started many years ago. To make a long story short, strictly speaking, it's not the cow that's producing methane, it's the microbiome in the rumen of the cow. And therefore, we address this microbiome and a specific strain of methanogens that is responsible for the methane production inside the cow. The blue ribbon in the middle shows you the very central element of the feed additive Bovaer. One of the very frequent questions that we are getting is, how much do you need to feed for a cow or a beef cattle? The scientific correct answer is between 1 and 1.5 grams per animal and per day. Mixing this in the feed of the cow is reducing methane by 30 or 40 or 50%. What's 1.5 gram? To make it more tangible, we say it's a quarter of a teaspoon that you mix in the daily feed of the cow. How fast does it act? It acts immediately. So very precisely within 30 minutes, the methane goes down to the level that you want to have it, and it stays there as long as you feed Bovaer. And then we communicate these numbers, 45% methane reduction in beef cattle and around 30% in dairy cows. I show you later, these are average numbers. We have also much higher numbers in methane reduction to report. And we also understand the interplay between Bovaer and the microbiome. And it's proven safe because we have now received the product registration in 45 countries. So we have done all the safety study required. And we say it's also good for our planet. How it works can be summarized in one sentence. It inhibits the last step of methane formation in these microorganisms, the archaea, and we have published these results. This is, of course, a topic where I can speak for hours, but probably less of an interest today. But the mode of action, it's all clarified and made publicly available. Few results here. We reduce methane emission on average by 30% with dairy and 45% in beef finishing. And you see the respective graphs here. You see the trials and also the number of methane reduction that we achieve. The question is, why are they not all the same? It's very easy. At the beginning, we were in a research mode and we did not really understand the interplay between dosage and the activity of the microbiome related to the diet of the animal. This is now fully understood, and we have published this result last year in December. Now we understand this clearly, and as soon as we know the dietary elements, we can precisely predict what dosage you need for 30 or 40% methane reduction. Very interesting for the Canadian audience, and we are very proud. The province of Alberta were one of the first governments supporting our activity many years back, over 10 years back. And we have conducted the largest beef cattle trial on Bovaer ever, including 14,000 heads over 2 years period. The results are shown here: corn finishing and barley finishing diets representing more Canadian, more US diet, 80 and 70% methane reduction. On the backgrounding, more on a roughage and grass-based diet, it's 23%, which is also clear when you don't adapt the dose. The other highlight here, which I want to bring forward to you, is in an Australian feedlot cattle that's currently being published, but we have presented this in conferences and also in webinars. We saw a 90% methane reduction. Again, depending on the diet that the cow eats or the cattle and the dosage of Bovaer you apply, we see here a 90% methane reduction without any negative effects on animal behavior, on animal health, and on productivity. On this slide, we are specifically proud of. It shows the number of trials around the world that we have conducted, and you see it's quite a lot. We have trialed Bovaer in 15 countries around the world. We have saved now, just during the trials, over 20,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. And you see also that more and more of the commercial partners are announcing publicly that they're working with us. So you see in Europe that the big dairy company, in Australia, NAPCO, the beef and Morton Co. and feedlot companies, also supermarket chain, Coles Group. We have announced publicly that we have signed a partnership for the US with Elanco, and also JBS in Brazil, Colon in Chile. They are all now announcing they're working with us because it's seen as a proven solution. I said it's available in 45 countries as of today, and the list of countries that are coming next are shown here on the left-hand side. And you see here, because we have to hand in the registration dossier, it got approved in 2021, first in Brazil and Chile. Europe was then following in 2022, and more countries saying, yes, it's approved. The last ones that were added to this list is Mexico and Costa Rica. And that's our plan here, where we hand in the registration dossier next and the associated timelines. Bovaer has no impact on dairy and beef quality and on production parameters or excreta, which is also relevant here for the audience. On production parameters, and you can read this, no negative effect on performance, on feed efficiency and daily gain, final weights. For dairy, milk yield and milk composition stayed unchanged, even in the positive, went into the positive. We had large taste panels on dairy and beef products, so the taste is not affected in any way, shape, or form. And then, of course, for all people that have a business running on manure stays unchanged. And for example, the usage in biodigesters has no effect. This is my last slide. Bovaer, where does it coming from? It's a combination of two words, is bovine and air. And since we cannot use it, we cannot name it Bovaer like this, because then we sound like an airline, which is legally not possible. We had to tweak it. So that's where the name is coming from. This is the last slide. Just here, I provided all the publications in the annex. So whoever shares the slide with the audience later on, you find all our publications here. But thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Maik. Although the concept of having an airline specifically for cows is really interesting, I see why you did have to tweak the name slightly, but thank you. That was a really interesting presentation, and I think the potential of feed additives are really exciting for the Canadian cattle industry. We do have another poll question that'll be popping up now. And this is to bridge kind of this presentation from Maik and our next presentation. So our question for you, what do you think the biggest challenge in adopting methane mitigation strategies is? Is it 1, regulatory approval, 2, the lack of market for low emission products, 3, the lack of information on the effects of productivity, 4, the costs, or we've given you an all of the above option? So please take a minute to fill out this poll, and then we will move on to our final presentation of the day. And while you're filling this out, also a reminder, if you do have any questions specifically for Anne or for Maik, feel free to put those in the Q&A now, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. All right, it looks like our poll has finalized, so here it is again. The question was, what do you think the biggest challenge in adopting methane mitigation strategies is? It looks like 16% of you said regulatory approval, 9% of you said lack of market for low emission products, 7% of you said lack of information on the effects of productivity, 18% of you said costs, and half of you, 50%, said all of the above. That's really interesting, and I'm sure we're going to delve into that as we move into the Q&A. But thank you again, Maik. Please now join me in welcoming Tamara Loisel, founder and CEO of Synergraze. Go ahead, Tamara.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Sean, and the School of Public Policy. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm just going to share my screen. Of course, if I can figure out how to do that. Okay. So again, my name is Tamara Loisel, and I am the CEO and founder of Synergraze, where we are also working to reduce greenhouse gases from cattle.
Sorry, Tamara, we're just seeing your slide deck. So yeah, if you could hit start from current slide, then we'll be able to see the whole slide. Yep, there we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my background, I am from a northern BC ranching family, and I graduated from the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Alberta and specialized in environmental science. For the past 20 years, just over 20 years, I have been working with Indigenous communities on issues around the environment. And as you'll learn in this presentation, we have a partnership with an Indigenous community now in our production of our Synergraze products. And I was also honored earlier this year with a Queen's Platinum Jubilee posthumously from Queen Elizabeth for my work with Synergraze, and had previously been awarded a Jubilee Diamond Jubilee for work also with an Indigenous community and the environment. So that I'm really proud of. So as Maik talked about, as a result of their digestive systems, cattle belch methane, which in the short term is about 25 times more potent as a heat trapping gas than is carbon dioxide. And that, we take it all together, all the cattle around the world, all the livestock around the world, so all ruminants, which include sheep and bison, is about the equivalent of the entire global transportation sector in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. So that's about the same as every car, truck, train, plane on the planet combined. And that is the United Nations statistic. Our Synergraze product is a revolutionary cattle feed additive that has been demonstrated to reduce methane in cattle belching by 90%. So in beef animals, that's equivalent to about reduction of about 1 ton of CO2e per year. And in dairy, that's even greater than that. Early research has also indicated that there may be some increases in weight gain. And here in Alberta, those methane reductions can also help generate Alberta carbon offset credits. The primary barrier to commercializing an algae or seaweed-based feed additive is a lack of sufficient biomass and scale for supplementation on a global scale. So we're working in cold water regions, we're a Canadian company, to use land-based cultivation to provide a consistent supply chain of seaweed additive. So there's a combination of wild stock harvest, ocean seaweed farming, as well as land-based cultivation. Our primary objective in the commercialization of natural algae-based feed additive is we are tank cultivating on land and processing in British Columbia on the BC coast, in addition to other things, but one of our primary projects is in BC in partnership with Sauk First Nation. Sauk First Nation is a partner with us. And we have this lovely quote from Chief Gordon Planis, and so that he's lived in this region his entire life. And as have my ancestors, I can see with my own eyes that our local environment has become increasingly out of balance and it needs our help. I strongly support the work of Synergraze and see it as a great opportunity to help Mother Earth. So again, we're very grateful for this relationship. And we will share more about what we are working on. So this is an example of the type of land-based cultivation system, one of which we are contemplating for our commercial scale up. So the whole process is about growing in a land-based system. We have a final product that would go out to the feedlots and be added to the micro machines, which you just program it by weight. And we are looking at a 1% or less of their diet comprised of the Synergraze additive. It gets mixed in with the ration and put out into the feed bunks. And there's no extra equipment or anything required on behalf of the feedlot or dairy producer to integrate Synergraze into their existing feeding system. So here in Alberta, we have about 4.9 million head of cattle, which represents about 69% of Canada's fed cattle and has an output of about 1.8 million head per year. Globally, that's a small fraction of what there is available globally, which is 1.4 billion head of cattle. So that's a lot of methane being emitted to the atmosphere. If 40% of Canada's cattle were supplemented with Synergraze, methane emissions from cattle would be reduced by approximately 9 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent every year. So we see our seaweed-based additive, which is also ecosystem-based, having and providing additional opportunities. So it can provide new industries in industry challenged coastal and inland regions and island regions. It provides employment through local labor, helps remediate hypernutrient enriched water, which sometimes has been enriched due to agricultural runoff, nitrates, for example, or manure, or else human sewage. Those are kind of the three really common sources of hyponutrient enriched water. The CO2 dissolved because CO2 is an input, one of the primary ingredients for growing seaweed, and removes CO2 from the water, it also helps fight ocean acidity. And because we're removing CO2 to grow the seaweed, in addition to having the 90% reduction of enteric methane, every ton of seaweed we grow for our feed sequesters about 2 tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And also, as mentioned earlier, there has been some evidence of increased livestock productivity. I'm just going to show a quick video that the ERA produced in conjunction with Synergraze, and it's about 3 minutes. explains our process. I have no idea what's going on here. Oh, that didn't work. So I'm going to try this one more time. If that doesn't work, I'll just, oh, there we go.
You may have to switch your screen so it's showing the video. Because all we're seeing is your slide at the moment. And then there'll also be a button that says share video as well, or audio from the video, so we can hear it.
Okay.
You'll have to stop sharing your screen
Okay.
and then reshare and select the
Okay.
audio button. Yeah.
Are you able to see and hear now? Sean?
I'm not hearing anything, but I do see it.
Sorry, how do I share the audio?
There should be a little checkbox when you're sharing your screen.
You'll have to stop sharing again and then reshare. But when you go to select what you're sharing, at the very bottom of your screen, there'll be a checkbox.
Yeah, and if this doesn't work, you can always send it to me and I can take a crack at this
Okay.
just through the chat.
Okay, so my share screen.
Yeah, it'll either be there
share
or
sound. Okay.
Yep.
Emissions to make sure it's healthy.
We can hear it now, but we can't see the video. So I think you're on the wrong screen.
My name's Calvin Booker. I'm a veterinarian and one of the managing partners.
Sorry, I didn't realize this was going to be so complicated.
It's okay. Technology is definitely a hard challenge of our age, so it's not your fault.
Companies like Synergraze who have new products.
Perfect.
Okay, so you can hear and
dioxide
see.
equivalent that comes.
Yep.
The amount of carbon
There we go.
dioxide equivalent that comes from cattle is about the same as the entire global transportation sector. So cows emit the same amount of greenhouse gases as does every truck, train, plane, ship on the planet combined. And what we're working on is an additive that can reduce those greenhouse gas emissions by over 90% and reduce the environmental footprint of cattle production. Hi, I'm Tamara Loisel, and I am the founder and CEO of Synergraze Inc., where we are working to reduce methane emissions from cattle. Globally, there's about 1.4 billion head of cattle. Here in Canada, we have about 12 million. And here in Alberta, we have about 4.9 million head of cattle. Our 4.9 million head of cattle produce about 8.8 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from enteric methane. So if we have a product that can reduce that by 90%, we're talking about a very significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
Here's how they do it. Synergraze's solution is a natural cattle feed additive made with algae. Algae that's never been used in this way before and that Synergraze grows themselves. First, they had to figure out how to grow a lot of it cost effectively. Once they've finished growing it, it's then taken out of the tank when it's processed and dried and ground into powder. That powder is brought out to feedlots, where it's mixed into the animal feed. A very small amount, less than 1% by weight, has a huge impact on the cattle's methane emissions. To make sure it's healthy and effective in commercial production, Synergraze works with feedlot health management services.
My name's Calvin Booker. I'm a veterinarian and one of the managing partners at Feedlot Health Management Services by TELUS Agriculture. Our company, as our focus, we're veterinarians and animal scientists and nutritionists, and we work with commercial producers, feedlots like this one, to help them optimize the health and production and growth of the animals in the feedlot. We work with companies like Syntergraze who have new products that they're developing for the cattle production market, trying to figure out how those actually work in commercial production operations.
This project will take us through the early commercialization production scale, where we will produce enough additive to feed about 135,000 cattle in a feedlot situation. So that's over 6 months. And we'll be able to reduce carbon emissions by about 78,000 tons of carbon dioxide with this early scale commercial project.
So with a product like this, I think the most exciting thing, as Tamara has indicated, is it has the potential to reduce methane emissions from cattle by up to 90%. And that's a big number. The real question is, okay, now when we scale that up, are there other benefits that we see? Are there any downsides that or risks that we need to manage? And we really won't know that till we scale it up and get it into commercial production systems.
ERA is matching funds up to $5 million, and it's a $15 million project.
Yeah. Sorry, just a second. Okay, just two more slides. Okay, so Syntergraze is helping tackle the global methane challenge. Will help Canada lead towards its methane reduction goals, help us get towards net zero, and also helps the US dairy industry meet its 25% reduction targets. And California was the first jurisdiction in the world to legislate methane reductions from cattle, and they have legislated 40% reduction by 2030. We also see this giving Canada's cattle producers an economic edge while becoming part of the solution to global climate change, and positions Canada to be a world leader and developer of a cutting edge and natural solution to reducing greenhouse gases. And we're really excited to announce that we will be launching in the Canadian market later this year. So please stay tuned for that. And if you have any further questions for me, please reach out by email or our website. Happy to address any more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara. That was a really fascinating presentation, and I think the concept of using something like seaweed probably isn't something that comes across the mind of Albertan cattle farmers, but definitely a really interesting and innovative product. We do have one more poll question, and then we're going to go into Q&A with all of our presenters today. So we'll pop that up right now. The question is, do you believe there is a potential for low methane beef production in Canada? And your options are yes, no, or I am unsure. Reminder too, while you're submitting your questions, we have about 15 minutes for Q&A today, so not a whole lot of time. So if you would like to have your question answered, or you see a question in there that you think would be really interesting to be answered, you can click the little thumbs up icon below it, and that will help it get to the top of the queue so that I can ask those questions first. If not, kind of follow-up questions, we can have you either send to me or send directly to the panelists to get kind of your answers. But yeah, we're not going to have time to answer all the questions today, so we'll have to have some of them sent on to the panelists after. But looking at our poll question before we move into the Q&A, do you believe there is potential for low methane beef production in Canada? Looks like an astounding 89% of you said yes, and 11% of you said unsure, with no one saying no. So obviously our presentations today were very exciting, and they offer some really cool, innovative solutions. We'll have all of our panelists turn their cameras back on now if they could, and we will ask our first question. So our first question, and I think this one, maybe we'll start with Tamara, and then we'll have Maik and Anne if you want to jump in on this. It is widely agreed upon the Canadian beef industry that feed additives present a tremendous opportunity to reduce methane emissions in beef cattle and will be a critical tool to meet the ambitious 2030 goals. However, we first need to address that these additives, such as Bovaer in Canada, has DSM already submitted their application for Bovaer use in Canada, and how long will it be before it's available? So I guess, sorry, this is a question for Maik.
So the question, the answer is yes, we have submitted the dossier. It's currently evaluated. And I think we hope towards the end of the year, early next year, it's done. Canada, that's interesting, has changed the classification of Bovaer, and it's reclassified as a feed additive, and that happened during 2022 because the Canadian producers, dairy and beef cattle producers, were not necessarily happy how this was handled. And there was a discussion, and Canada said we reclassify this as a feed additive. So we are on a good track in Canada. And as I said, Canada, the province of Alberta, and I see emission reduction ERA, Alberta, they were also co-financing and supporting us a lot since 2013.
Perfect. Thank you, Maik. Our next question is for you, Tamara. If the land-based seaweed production from the feed additive were added to the LCA for beef cattle production, what would you expect the increased water usage to be? From a consumer perspective, how can we promote the trade-off of the increased water usage but reduce CH4 emissions?
Well, the water use is quite low. We have a 100% recirculating aquaculture facility. So the water footprint is incredibly small. So I don't see it as a trade-off. And if you're in an area that we mentioned earlier that actually has hyper nutrient enriched water, you're actually improving the water quality by taking those excess nutrients out and using them for seaweed growth.
Perfect. Thank you. Just adding on to that, Anne, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in the industry for reaching its 2030 GHG goals? And how do you think that feed additives like the two we talked about today can help?
Oh, good question, Sean. I think, well, first of all, time. If I had to have one word to answer that question, it's time. Here we are, 2023, our 2030 goals are less, 7 years away and we've got these steps. Maik talked about the fact that the process has started, but end of 23, end of 24, we've got to produce these products. We have to get producers understanding what these products are and get them into the system and what those benefits are. It's so there's the production piece, there's the producer piece, and these all have to work together. So there's several steps, and history has told me those things take time, and we don't have a lot of that to get these deals accomplished and these goals met. So that's where clearly we need to be collaborating, work together, move at the speed of commerce. And I think that's often where we struggle and fall down. So, in any of the work that the Canadian Roundtable has done through our National Beef Sustainability Assessment, feed additives has clearly been one of the most efficient ways to get towards meeting our goals. So these two products obviously fit right into that. So hope that answers that question.
Absolutely. Our next question is both for you, Tamara, and for you, Maik. So maybe Tamara, we'll have you start. How can both additives be included on grazing cattle systems, and what are the costs?
Well, for grazing cattle, if it's dose dependent like ours is, it will require additional equipment for disseminating a specific dose. So we do have a plan of attack for deploying a type of system in a pasture-based feeding system. Our initial commercial rollout is for confined feeding, and we will be looking at pasture-based systems the end of 2024, looking to deploy those.
And Tamara made it very easy for me because I can join from a development strategy. We also started with, you need to start somewhere. So we started with animal confined systems because there are many, but as we speak, we are developing a new form, so-called retained or slow release form that the cow can eat, and that releases, the methane inhibiting effect over a very long period of time. That's a prototype that we are testing at the moment, and that's our next product introduction. At the moment, Bovaer 10 is for animals in confined system.
Perfect. And Mike, there's a good follow-up here. So how does Bovaer impact producers' costs of production on average? Is it mostly cost effective for larger heads of cattle, or are smaller and medium-sized operations going to be looked at too?
So this is, of course, one of the most interesting questions that we have, and what we also learned a lot, because when you think who has a problem with methane production, it's certainly not the farmer, it's the society, right? And therefore the question is who bears the cost and what's the business model? And what we see more and more is that producers, and I mentioned in my presentation, supermarket chains and also people from politics are joining. So the statement of our CEOs is there will be no additional cost for the farmer. The cost will be, the business model will be distributed differently. One element is carbon credits or carbon reduction certifications. In Europe, in one country has already started to politics. The government of London has put some money out, public money, saying we want to support this product introduction. So from this perspective, the business model will be different in different regions of the world with different customers. It depends a bit, but we say it's no additional cost for the actual farmer.
Very interesting. I think just a follow-up that pops into my head from this, do you think there may be potential for labeling such as low methane beef appearing on our supermarket shelves? And maybe I'll pose this question to Anne.
So yes, I do. But at the same time, if this is something that's positive in moving our industry towards some of our goals, especially in terms of our GHG goals, and I would assume it could be cross all of the industry. Canada's lucky a little bit in that regard in terms of our size versus some of the other large countries that are going to be looking at products like this. So sometimes we're able to move as an industry together rather than one versus another. But like our certification program for sustainable beef here in Canada, it starts very much like these two products are starting small in as they say, in a confined area and moving forward. So that's how something I would see as low methane beef potentially being marketed.
And Tamara or Mike, I'd open it up to you too if you want to add anything onto that.
Yeah, I think there's going to be tremendous interest and demand sooner or later. I mean, not right now. I think a lot of people just recognize that it's pretty early in the game. But as more and more products like Synagraz and Bovaer start coming on the market and is a choice, I think that we will see increasing consumer demand for a low methane beef and dairy products in the market.
Exactly, and I just joined Tamara with her statement, and I can tell you there are already in some regions of the world not low methane, but low carbon beef and also low carbon milk as a label. And that's of course very legitimate to distinguish or differentiate yourself on the product level for the consumer, because more and more consumers are asking for this. We also have conducted consumer research, right? Asking a lot of people in different regions of the world how they judge these type of technologies. Are they supportive, and are they willing to pay a little bit more for low carbon milk and meat? And we did this in New Zealand and also in the US. And a large part of these consumers are saying, yes, this should be more on the shelf. We should have the choice. And if it's there, we are also willing to pay a little bit more. And if that's the case, the financing topic is also answered more quicker than we think.
Absolutely. I think that's really interesting. And while we're talking about the consumers, we also have another question here. So we'll start with Tamara. Has the bioaccumulation of the active ingredients from your additive been studied in the end consumer? And if so, what are the results?
Yeah, the bioaccumulation, the presence of residues of the bioactives have been studied, in particular with a lot of our collaborators. So there is a lot of research out there, happy to share, about bioaccumulation not being an issue in the beef or dairy produced with the algae-based feed additives.
And for Bovaer, we published the mode of action 2016 in PNAS in a high-ranked scientific journal in the US. And Bovaer that gets degraded into natural fragments by its own mode of action, and therefore we don't find it back in edible products. So that's also part of all the documents that we are handing in around the world for registration.
So our next question, I'm going to reword a little bit. The question was, do you see each other as competitors or partners? But I think kind of the answer is obvious from the conversation today that we are looking for synergies within the market. So I think a better question for the three of you, and maybe we'll start with Anne, is how can you two work together in this market to kind of create that low methane, low carbon economy?
Well, I think this is what we have here at this webinar today is exactly what we need to see is more product, more research, more work being done in this area. There's room for everyone, just like there's room for all the beef that we want to consume. So I think this is positive, and working together is going to get us a whole bunch further than looking at it as competitive. So this is how we learn from one another, and and I'm far from a scientist, but just watching from the outside and seeing how quickly research and moves and the technologies move, we have to be nimble and move along with it. And so we need companies like these that are willing to step up to the platter and get the job done. So I'm really pleased to see these kinds of collaboration at any levels, broad or small.
Perfect. Maik?
I see it very similar. I can just join on, right? It's such an important topic to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to fight global warming. The only thing where we insist is that people are making correct claims, right? Because that's also known that sometimes people are going all over the place. But hey, in the 21st century, and with all this scrutiny and the scientific methods, that's also quickly discovered and made public. So that's also no concern. We have announced that we are building a plant dedicated for Bovaer. It will be in Scotland, and it's already in the construction as we speak. It will have an output of 2,000 tons of Bovaer, and we are replicating hopefully this plant around the world so that we can serve more and more cows. But that's a big starting point for DSM. And from a scalability, as you can imagine, there is in principle no limit, right? If you need more, you build another plant. And we are doing this in partnerships around the world.
Perfect. And Tamara, if you have anything to add, I'll open it up to you.
Yeah, just would add that, yeah, there's a urgent sense in society as a whole to be reducing methane emissions, and any little bit that we can all do goes a long way. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 1.4 billion head of cattle in the world. There's not a feed additive on the market that can currently serve even a small fraction of that. So the faster we can all get to market and start reducing methane to help move towards a net zero society, it's a win-win all the way around.
Well, thanks, Tamara, for your statement, because people sometimes forget how many animals are around the world, right? And what it really means.
So we just have about a minute left for Q&A, so I'm not going to take any more questions, but I would just like to welcome the opportunity for all of you to share any final thoughts or key takeaways that you'd like for people to take from your presentation today. So maybe we'll start with Anne.
Well, I know I've already touched on this, but when you said takeaways, it's time is of the essence, and we need to move quickly. You've heard that from both of the other presenters in terms of the urgency here. And again, partnerships, collaboration, speed of commerce, action before words. We need to move quickly. So I want to make sure that the audience hears that clearly from me.
Perfect. Next, Maik.
So you saw we are extremely data driven. Everything is transparent what we have done on Bovaer. People can follow us on our webpage, and all the publications are also there. And we are looking forward also on partnerships around the world to address one of the most urgent topics of our time, that's climate change.
Perfect. And Tamara?
Well, similar to both Anne and Mike, I see this as an urgent issue, starting to reduce carbon dioxide and methane emissions. Syntegrase offers a natural approach, an ecosystem approach, and we want to do what we can to help see immediate reductions in methane.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists today. It has sure been a pleasure sitting here listening to you. I've definitely learned a lot, and I hope our audience has as well. I do see we have a number of questions left over, so we will follow up with you with the recording of this presentation, as well as information of how you can forward your questions on to the presenters today. So look out for that information. We definitely don't want to leave your questions unanswered if you have some that you were really hoping to get answered today. But I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar. We really hope you enjoyed it, and please let us know how we did by filling out our feedback questionnaire that will be emailed to you later this week with the recording. But that's it for today. Thank you again, and thank you to all our presenters.